YouTube. My name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Bookas and Books, and welcome to this latest installment of my ultimate Jane Austen ranking series. In this video, I'm going to rank the plots of Jane Austen's novels. Now, of course, having a plot is not particular to Jane Austen. Hopefully, every novel has a plot. But in the case of my ranking series, I decided that plot is a very important element, and I wanted to rank it. Plot is distinct from the characters. So when I'm ranking the plot, I'm really just ranking the action, I guess, the storyline, how intricately built it is, how the novel is constructed. So I'm not taking into account whether I like the characters or not, and I'm not taking into account whether, I'm not taking into account the characters. I'm not taking into account the tone. I'm just really taking into account the stuff that happens in the novels and how much I like them. Because I don't think there's any other way of ranking plots. It's you like it or you don't. Unless there's a plot hole, obviously, but I don't think there's any major plot holes in Jane Austen, so it wouldn't really count. So it's really purely subjective ranking of how much I like the story in the novels. So let's go. Oh, I should say, total, complete spoiler warning. Every minute of this video will be a spoiler. So I assume that you have read the novels. I assume that you know what's going on. I'm not giving any particular, I'm not going to explain what goes on in every novel. So I assume you have read them and that you know what I'm talking about. And I assume that you don't care for spoilers because you have read them. So just so you know, I made a spoiler warning in the introduction video, but it's been a while now. So I think it's worth repeating, and it's particularly valid for this video. Spoiler warning every minute of the way. So let's go. The ranking at number 6, the plot that I find the least interesting is that of Northanger Abbey. Now, of course, this is a debut novel, so it comes with its faults. The storyline is very linear. We meet Catherine Morland when she goes with her neighbor to Bath, and she meets a young man and she flirts, and then eventually she visits the young man's house, and then she goes back home, and then she marries the man. Okay, so it's very linear. And the main problem with that very linear plot is that there's almost no link between the first part and the second part. So the first part in Bath, we meet many characters such as Isabella Thorpe and John Thorpe, and we spend quite a bit of time with Mrs. Allen. And in the second part, these characters basically completely disappear when Catherine Morland is in Northanger Abbey. And then we meet new characters such as Eleanor Tilney and Mr. Tilney, and we spend more time with them. And there's no link between the first and the second part, and the plot itself. There's a bit of the mystery of Catherine that thinks that maybe Mr. Tilney killed his wife, but we don't really believe in it. It's not really a mystery. It's obvious that it's Catherine's imagination that has just run away. So it's an okay plot, I guess. So I put it at number 6. At number 5, another very linear novel. It is Mansfield Park. It starts at the beginning and it ends at the end. I mean by that the past never comes back to haunt the characters. What happens on the page is what happens in the entire story, with very, very few exceptions. There are a few things that happen off scene. For example, Henry Crawford getting a promotion for Fanny's Brothers. That is something that happens off scene. And of course, there's the running away of Henry Crawford and Maria Rushworth. That also happens off scene. But basically, what you see on the page is the totality of the story. There's not much that goes on outside, except for the Crawfords. But then again, the Crawfords are not the main subject of this book. Because there's also Mary Crawford when she's in London. We don't know exactly what she does, except that we can guess what she does. But basically, the past of the characters has no consequence on the future, and what you see is what you get. So it's a very linear plot. It's not a lot of action going on. Jane Austen novels are considered slow-paced, I guess, if we can compare them to thrillers. They are quite slow paced, but even among those, Mansfield Park is even slower paced. There's a lot less that happens. We are most of the time in an isolated country estate, so there's not a lot of visitors, and it's a very closed circle of people that we spend time with. So plot wise, not much happens in Mansfield Park. Number 4, a book where a lot happens, but I think the most interesting things happen off-scene, so that's why I put number 4. It is Sense and Sensibility. I say that the most interesting things happen off-scene. I think two of the most interesting characters in Sense and Sensibility are the villains. It's Willoughby and Lucy Steele, and their actions are not necessarily on the page. Now, we see, of course, Willoughby flirting a lot with Marianne and coming very, very close to ruining her reputation. But the maneuvers of Lucy Steele, we don't see. We just see the results of them. And I wish we could see them. However, it does show that the plot is very intricately constructed because there's a link between Willoughby and Colonel Brandon's ward. There's a link between Lucy Steele and Eleanor Dashwood's love interest and sister-in-law Fanny Dashwood, and all the characters fit together in one way or another. They all know one another. It appears very natural. Yeah, plot-wise, I think there are parts where not much happens, I guess. So yeah, at number 4, it's a very good plot, but I guess it's a realization of the plot that is perhaps not as good as I would expect. So I don't know if I'm fair in knocking it down a notch or 2 because it's not realized as well as it could be. But yeah, I put it at number 4. At number 3, Persuasion. Now, this one is short. It's shorter than the others, so it doesn't leave as much room for a very intricate plot. It doesn't leave a lot of room for side stories and backgrounds and that sort of thing. However, I think it unfolds in a very natural way. We meet Anne Elliot when she's 27. We are told of what happened to her in the past, that she was engaged to this Captain Wentworth, and the sister of Captain Wentworth is coming to live at Kellynch Hall. And then Anne goes visit her younger sister Mary Musgrove, and she spent a lot of time at Uppercross. And what happens there is relevant to what will happen later in the book. There's not a single wasted scene in there. Once again, it's characters who spend a lot of time together in a manner that feels natural. It doesn't feel like their presence is forced on one another because the writer has to write the story. So even though it appears very simple, I think the plot is quite intricate, especially if we add in Mr. Elliot and his past flirting, I guess, with Elizabeth Elliot, and how Elizabeth was more or less insulted that he did not ask her to marry him. And also Anne's friend, Mrs. Smith, and what happened to her and how Mr. Elliot treated her. It's nothing scandalous, but it's natural. It feels right the way it is written and the way it is told. So at number 3. At number 2, I would put the book that probably has the most mysteries in it, and that is Emma. Who is Jane Fairfax's admirer? Who is Harriet Smith? Who are her parents? Is she the illegitimate daughter of a nobleman, or at least a gentleman? When will Frank Churchill show up? Is he a good guy or not? And things like that. So there are a lot of little mysteries in Emma. And there's a lot of things that goes on, a lot of little events. Now, of course, we are in a teeny tiny village of Highbury, so it's not like a high-stake thriller. But a lot of things happen in Emma, and I think the plot is very, very interesting. And yeah, it's a book that will keep you turning the pages. Of course, if you like Jane Austen, but I think the plot in Emma is very good. However, I don't think it is as good as in number 1, Pride and Prejudice. That is, in my opinion, the most tightly plotted novel of Jane Austen, and I think it's the most tightly plotted novel ever. Everything that happens in this book happens for a reason, and not everything is told on the page. There's a lot of things that we are told that are shown on the page, but there's a lot of things that happen in the background. Now, Elizabeth Bennet, we see her going to many places. Of course, we start and she's at Longbourn, and then she goes spend a few days at Netherfield, and then back to Longbourn, and then she goes sees the Collinses in Kent, And then she travels with her aunt and uncle, the gardeners, to Derbyshire. And then she's back to Longbourn. And we follow, as readers, we follow Elizabeth Bennet. But while she's away, things keep going on to the other characters. The other characters keep on living. So there's Jane, who is in London, and there's Lydia, who is in Brighton. And all of these characters go on having a life behind the scenes, and it has consequences. And this is also a novel where every characters are somewhat linked to one another, and that makes it just so fascinating, in fact, because one decision by one character may impact another even though they don't even know it. So our main character is Elizabeth Bennet. She has a cousin who is Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins' employer is Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She is the aunt of Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy is a friend of Mr. Bingley, and Mr. Bingley lives next door, well, close to Longbourn, which is where Elizabeth Bennet lives. So all of that makes this world very close together, very tight-knitted, and that means that the past of each of these characters may come to haunt their present. Of course, I'm thinking of Mr. Wickham, who used to know Mr. Darcy when they grew up. And then there's Georgiana. She's a very secondary character, Georgiana Darcy, and yet she comes and play a role in there too. So for the plot, for the storyline, I think Pride and Prejudice is the best of Jane Austen's novels. So let me know in the comment what you think. What do you think is the best storyline? So if we don't take into account the characters, just the storyline, what is the most interesting story in Jane Austen? And I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!